If we have a multi-generational workforce and everybody kind of came up with different expectations or interests, how do we start to get this right?
We have, for the first time in many of our lives, 5 generations all in the workforce at the same time. And silent generation, or traditionalists, which are probably in the workforce, most of them are retired at this point, but not all. They tend to be a little more competitive, which is just the nature of how boomers were raised.
We as individuals have needed to evolve considerably in how we work just in these past 5 years. People who are leaders have needed to evolve as individuals and as leaders. It's a double weight, and there's not a lot of certainty on what the sort of mile markers are.
Taylor Swift. She was brilliant in understanding that people aren't coming for the stadium. They're coming for her and for the music. So she not only had her concerts in stadiums, but also in theaters and also viewable on demand, and also the friendship bracelets and all of that stuff that just rooted people in what is the purpose.
My first very special guest is a workplace strategist and change leader for global companies including Riot Games, Netflix, and Hulu. She helps organizations solve complex workplace challenges and believes that improving how we work is the key to improving how we live. She is Sara Escobar. Welcome to the show, Sara.
Thank you so much for having me.
And my second very special guest is a work futurist and workplace leader who has led transformations at WeWork, American Express, and CBRE. She draws on expertise in behavior, hybrid models, and AI's impact on how and where we work. She is Corinne Murray. Welcome to the show, Corinne.
Thanks for having me too.
So together, they are the co-authors of Work, Then Place, Navigating Modern Work and Where It Happens. So I would love to just hear from each of you on this first question of mine, which is that the book's title I found fascinating. So I didn't even have to make it past the title to be fascinated, which is pretty cool. But it's Work, Then Place. So it splits this common concept of the workplace just right down the middle, which is amazing to me. So most of us, like myself, a lot of knowledge workers, when we think about workplace, we just think of the office. It's just how it is. But what's a better way now of thinking about this modern concept of what constitutes a workplace? I don't know. Which one of you would like to tackle that one first?
I'll take one. I'll take the first stab at it. So I like to think of how we define workplace as a yes and model. So it is the built environment. It is the place that we go to, but it's also the collaborative tools that we use to connect with people, whether they're sitting next to us or whether they're in another time zone. And it also is about the working behaviors, so the ways of working, agreements you have with your teams, the workflows that you participate in, and the overall company culture that enables how you do work and how effectively that happens. So it's sort of this like nesting doll of workplace, of all of these things live together, but we don't necessarily see or touch the digital piece and the experiential piece the way that we do the physical.
Yeah, a little bit less tangible. Yeah. Sarah, what do you think? You want to build on that?
I'm smiling because I love Corinne analogies. Every time I get on anything and talk with Corinne, there's a new analogy. So we just got the nesting doll one, which I haven't heard before. But yeah, I think I echo, right. I echo what Corinne's saying, but also, it changes every so often what the workplace is. And we're now in the 4th industrial revolution, if you look at all the studies out there. And it really, technology enabled us to reimagine workplace yet again, way before we did when COVID hit. And so, laptops allowed us to really work anywhere, especially as knowledge workers. And I think we've seen some really interesting new inventions of how this happens. I was, for instance, working at Netflix when COVID hit, and it was pretty interesting to figure out, how do you produce a TV show when you can't all be together? And so, you have to kind of reinvent every so often. And I think we've had some interesting forcing factors in this 4th industrial revolution.
Yeah, so I'm hearing that workplace, while it does still remain an office environment for some, and it could be your home office environment for others, it's that tangible thing where you're like, oh, I go over here and this is where I do my work. But it's also more than that. It's layered. It's a lot of things that are a little bit more ephemeral, but still critically important to both our performance and our experience of work, et cetera. And it kind of leads me to a question for you, Corinne, which is thinking about, experience. And I thought it was really fascinating in the book that you distinguished between employee experience, which is something I think about and study a lot, and workplace experience. And I was like, oh, that's a phrase I don't hear quite as often. So how can you describe for me like the difference between workplace experience and how it relates to employee experience?
Sure. So I think the same goes here of like this is another nested relationship. Employee experience is the end-to-end journey of being an employee. So it can start as soon as you are searching for a job and apply for something online, or you're having your interviews, all the way to your departure. Workplace experience is what sort of it is that end-to-end experience of how you interact with the digital, the physical, and the experiential environments that shape the workplace. So it's the relationship between those three dynamics we just were talking about with each individual or with each team and how they facilitate success, productivity, whatever the metrics might be.
Okay, I got you. So if I'm on a project team, my workplace experience might include the tools locally that we use to manage the projects, communicate, share the information. But employee experience is a little bit broader than that. It might be my affiliation. Like you have each worked for and consulted with some pretty name brand companies. So it's like I'm affiliated with Netflix or Riot Games or CBRE or something like this. You're like, okay, well, there's a lot more totality to that than just my experience of the work itself.
The workplace experience is just one of the very many through lines that you as an employee have while you're working at a company. So we very intentionally carved out workplace experience. And when we say the employee experience, we really are talking about within the context of workplace, because employee experience can mean compensation and benefits. It can mean the perks and, your professional development. There's just so many different ways that employee experience can be defined. And so we really wanted to be clear on when we talk about employee experience, it's through this particular lens.
Gotcha. So and we'll stick with something of more of a traditional lens here, Sarah, when you think about workplace, and let's talk about the office environment itself, because for a lot of us, well, it might be a little different than it was before when we go in. I talk to a lot of companies now that say, well, let's go in 2 or 3 days a week. Let's coordinate those days so we can maximize our time together. Some are like, well, we always had to go in, like, or the nature of what we do, whatever it might be. But one of the things, as I was reading the book, I hadn't thought about this before, but the nature of the office environment, like its literal layout, has changed over the years. And I'm old enough to have started work when there were things such as corporate, those corner offices that made, like, everybody wanted that corner office. That was desirable. Or cube cities, like these cubicles everywhere. And then later we moved to an open concept because we wanted knowledge workers to have collaboration. And I was at dinner the other night talking to an engineer and said, that was the worst. I couldn't concentrate on anything. And then now it's kind of like all over the place. But my question for you, when you think about this, Sarah, is if we have a multi-generational workforce and everybody kind of came up with different expectations or interests or desires for what that looks like, how do we even possibly start to get this right?
Yeah. Habits are hard to change, right?
Yeah, right.
So, I just want to root us a little bit in kind of what are those habits first. And we have, for the first time in many of our lives, 5 generations all in the workforce at the same time. And silent generation, or traditionalists, which are probably in the workforce the least at this point. Most of them are retired at this point, but not all. They're rooted in more hierarchy. And then you have a ton of boomers that are still in the workforce, and they tend to be a little more competitive, which is just the nature of how boomers were raised. There was job limitations and resource limitations after World War II that just, boomers tend to be a little bit more competitive. And those 2 generations tend to be in power right now. Now you have more millennials coming up and taking more of the leadership roles. And
let's not hurt Gen X's feelings. They're in there too.
Right. Gen X is in there too.
You can't ignore the Gen X.
Yep. Gen X is in there too. Sorry, Gen X. But, millennials tend to be the ones that are pushing the more adaptability and inclusivity. Gen X does tend to be a little bit more, I had to do my time, you get to do your time as well. And so you're kind of battling with a little bit of that, right? So I think it's really about getting all the right people in the room and making sure that you're discussing individual desires and generational desires, but they do tend to fall a little more individualistic, and really saying, what does our team need to be successful? And I think that that's a tough thing to do because you tend to want to go, okay, boss of mine that's going to determine my bonus and raise at the end of the year, I'll do what you want me to do. But it's really about having those conversations and enabling people to be open during those conversations.
It sounds to me like a real recipe for one size fits none if we're not careful. And that was where that engineer I was talking to in the open office environment, it came from a good place. Let's be collaborative. Let's really share ideas. And you're like, okay, but when I need to do focus, concentrated work, that's the wrong office environment for me. How do we, meet people where meet their needs? I suppose is the way to say that. Yeah. But I think, Corinne, when I'm thinking a little bit more about work, change is the name of the game. It just seems so dynamic. There's just been just one innovation after the next. Things do sometimes economic conditions changing, everything like that. And I want to read a quote from the book. And y'all write, most executives are used to leading change within their sphere of control, relying on familiar tools, timelines, and confidence in the outcomes. However, the changes reshaping modern work defy these patterns. They are nonlinear, behavioral, and often beyond immediate comprehension or control. This to me sounds like chaos. This is what stokes fear in most people. You can't control it.
We're
Oh my
trying to
God.
make it organized chaos, at least.
Organized chaos. And that's my question is like, what can my listeners do to sort of operate with this in this chaotic environment, not melt down, and even embrace this kind of embody this term you have, which is change champions, as you put it. Like, what can we do in light of the realities of this situation?
For sure. And I think it's important to know, yes, I mean, we wrote it that way intentionally to say, like, we are in a new paradigm. I think we could argue that we've been in a new paradigm since 2020, and we're still filtering through the mess to figure out where due north is. And it's a lot. We as individuals have needed to evolve considerably in how we work just in these past 5 years. People who are leaders have needed to evolve as individuals and as leaders. So it's a double weight, and there's not a lot of certainty on what the sort of mile markers are. So we wrote that to basically acknowledge this is difficult. Like, we are in a moment where this is just, we're not going to say unprecedented times because that's gotten diluted, but we're in new territory. And so to shift your perspective as a leader, to move away from assuming that change is a move from one certainty to another, is to figure out what are your basically go back to sort of science class in 7th grade when you're learning about the scientific method. What are your controls and what are your variables? And you should be searching for what are these things that, at least for this moment, are the pillars of certainty. We're not going to have all of them, but we're going to have some. So let's hang on to those and say, these are the things that will anchor us. And these are the variables that we need to navigate and figure out this works for now, and basically set up this continuous exercise of examining. It doesn't need to be looking at it every single day and saying, is this right anymore? Is this right anymore? Just coming up with a cadence with which you and your partners or your peers and the people that you report to come back to the changes that you've made. And they don't need to be dramatic. It could be as simple as, we don't have to answer each other's emails after 7 p.m. local time. Unless a fire is literal fire is happening, we expect you to log off. It could be something as really minimal as that. And then you can check in a month or two later to see how's that been going. Have we been able to adhere to that? What's been getting in the way of us adhering to that? Is there something that's more suitable for what we're trying, what our circumstances are? So I give that example just to say there's a lot of enormous stuff going on. Find the small things that you can experiment with that are within your realm, that are easy to do, easy to implement. And is it the biggest amount of improvement to that workplace or employee experience? Maybe not. But what will give that benefit is the continued engagement with it. To me, that's the biggest lesson, is for leaders to understand that the changes that are coming, need you to be more responsive and just ready for evolution and adaptivity than making the big change. So the openness and willingness to move is the real key. And so figuring out where that's easy for you to do is my best recommendation for leaders right now.
Yeah, I'm hearing you say that basically in these dynamic environments, it's almost like the sample rate has to go up. We have to check in with our teams that much more frequently and say fundamental things like, "Hey, how's our communication right now? Everybody good, or do we need to revisit something?" If I think we're healthy boundaries, what's our reaction to that? How are we doing? So you're checking in more frequently, and during times where things are a little bit quieter, there's not so much tumultuous change. Maybe you don't have to do that as often because things are going pretty well. But here I'm hearing you say that we need to match our check-ins, but also control what you can control, right?
Yeah,
Realize,
control what you can control, and also try not to change everything at once. Like pick one thing, isolate, and then make sure that you get to a place of satisfaction amongst your quorum, or amongst your cohort, and then you can start exploring the next thing. I think that's the other part with change that in organizations we are desensitized to, in a way, is we assume change needs to sort of be like this big bang, a before and after moment, as opposed to an exercise of cultivating something better over a period of time.
I'm okay saying you have to rebuild that coffer, right? So many people say we need to be in the office 2 days a week to connect with each other. But what Corinne's talking about doesn't require an office, right? So if you think about the multiple different ways that you can rebuild that coffer of trust, sometimes it will be in person because you need that. But sometimes it doesn't need to be. It just needs to be that little thing that helps increase it a tiny bit.
yeah, and I think that incrementalism sometimes gets a bad rap. Like, oh, we want big changes. We don't want to just add 1% to our revenue. We want to have these, let's a step function. Okay, great. But the reality is that a lot of these changes, even that we're experiencing, were gradual. So I think we don't have to feel like we have to, totally uh, pivot, 90 degrees, and all of a sudden we're going in a totally different direction. But we do have to embrace the fact that we will need to modify and make changes over time. But I want to give, I've been following, like, we've talked about in generalities a little bit about the macro environment, but your book does such a great job of using its own title of Work Then Place to kind of break down each of those. They're each independently frameworks in and of themselves. So I thought for the next part of our conversation, we could talk a little bit about that. And Sara, in the work section, you start with the W in work, which is why and what. And you refer to the importance of this communicating the North Star. Like, what's the why between why we're doing what we're doing? Maybe we're going through a change. Maybe we're transforming something. We're adopting AI. We're going to acquire a competitor, whatever it might be. And so I think that this concept of a North Star is very compelling, but it's also a little bit easy to say. I don't know that companies always get it right or even know exactly what it is. So I was wondering if you might demystify for us, when you describe a North Star, like, what is that and what role does it play organizationally during times of change?
Yeah, let's start with the high level, still not being able to really grasp it, but it's a clear shared sense of purpose, right? And trust behind that purpose. And I think, weave in what Corinne was just talking about, which is building that trust and increasing the coffer when you need to increase the coffer. That helps people know that you are rooted in that sense of purpose, and then trust that the decisions that you're making are aligned with it. I think many people, when they think about place, and this is a big reason why we made the what and why the first, piece of work. But many people, when they think about place, they think, oh, it's a place that people need to be. But if it's not rooted in the what, then you're going to lose people. So people don't come for the building, right? So Corinne uses this great example that I'm going to go ahead and use, but it's Taylor Swift. She was brilliant in understanding that people aren't coming for the stadium. They're coming for her and for the music. So she not only had her concerts in stadiums, but also in theaters and also viewable on demand, and also the friendship bracelets and all of that stuff that just rooted people in what is the purpose. And I have a good business example as well, which is Hulu. So back in the early days of Hulu, we were really rooted in we are a creative company and said, okay, we're maybe not going to get people to think about their creativity every day when they're sitting at the computer typing away on something. So, what could we do that really promotes creativity? And what we did was we said, okay, most companies are making food free. We're going to not do that, but we're going to have an inordinate amount of snacks available. And what happened was incredible because people started turning all those snacks into meals and really making sure that that creativity was a core part of what happened every moment of their day to day. Even when they weren't sitting at their computer and traditionally working, they were thinking about that creativity and how they made all those snacks into meals. So there's simple ways to connect to your purpose.
Yeah, and it's a good manifestation of the fact that, you're doing something tangible, something that's evidence that not only is this our purpose, we're actually, snacking it into existence in
Yeah.
that example, which is pretty cool.
I think the other thing that's important with that too is a lot of the way that workplace and real estate transformations are traditionally run is this is just a built environment. This is what we do when we build environments, and they're not necessarily connected to that broader organizational mission or the company goals for the next 5 years. So this was another effort on our part to say converge those or align those as much as possible because because where work happens and how work happens are becoming more and more intertwined as we become more digital first and flex into being in person and all that kind of stuff. We need to make sure that what we're building is driven by purpose, not just this is an office and this is how offices are built.
Yeah, and Corinne, I'll keep you on the hot seat here for a second, because if the W in work is all about purpose, your remaining part of the framework goes into operationalize, regulate, and then you talk about creating knowledge bases. So that's the ORK in work, and I find that super elegant. So we've started with the why and the what, and then we've gone into more of these kind of execution oriented, operationalize, regulate, knowledge base. But my question for you, Corinne, where do most companies get tripped up? Like, are they getting tripped up even stumbling out of the gate when it comes to like the why and the what? Or is it like, no, they've kind of got a good sense of that, but then it's really in these next, ORK kind of mnemonic you have for us?
Yeah. So there are two things that I think are macro struggles that are driven by one, we try to change too much too quickly. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we are changing a physical environment. You can't just change carpet or, change workstations. Everything changes when you're changing a built environment. So those two things, like those two realities, make it quite hard for change to be embraced because it's so abrupt, no matter how much, how many town halls and user guides and, simulated experiences you provide people. So part of why we broke up the process the way that we did is to posit like we need to be changing behaviors before we change environments. And this is, we learned that like ourselves through the trial and error of running these types of projects. And there always being unnecessary friction between people moving into a new environment and then adjusting over the next 3, 6, 9 months. So those are the macro issues. And then in terms of where people kind of get it wrong through this, just focused on the behaviors, is assuming that one size will fit all. So, we're going to change this one behavior and it's going to work unilaterally. That's usually that usually is, I think, one of the telltale signs. And then how that then scales is more challenging because then you're sort of just ramming it down instead of saying, we want to change this thing for this reason because it supports our mission or our purpose. And here are a couple of different ways that it can translate depending on, the technicalities of your business unit or the technicalities of your particular team. So I think a lot of it is just perspective shift as opposed to you got to throw the book out and do it differently. It's really just coming up with like an 80% baked solution and letting the other 20% be decided and developed by the end users, which
But not too quickly.
That's right. Yeah, so a lot of this is finesse. And I think a lot of big transformation is not necessarily treated with big finesse because it's so big. And so we're trying to go against the grain and say, yeah, change is real big. Start here, start with this, help your people build the rest of it with you. And then build a knowledge base. And where knowledge base is really important and also is sort of a struggle I think that most organizations have is that information calcifies. It is representative of a moment in time as opposed to something that remains dynamic. And so it can be difficult to maintain that. But if we sort of go back to what we were talking about on the manager level, wherever in an organization you manage the information that is pertinent to your team and make sure that it is up to date and could be understood not just by you guys as the subject matter experts, but if someone is brand new is coming in, can they understand? Because that's really the intention of knowledge bases, is that a newcomer can read and say, all right, this is new stuff to me, but I know enough to get started. And that's the goal, as opposed to, I think everyone who listens will have had some sort of difficulty with an intranet site at some point in their career. Like it's far easier said than done, but a lot of it is just really breaking this work into digestible bits instead of trying to boil the ocean all at once.
Yeah. It definitely sounds like keeping that user in mind, understanding that, gradual is better than abrupt, and that we have to, write from their perspective, for example, in our knowledge bases. And that's only after we've codified things that are working. Like, yeah, there's a lot in that as well. But I also want to move on to the second part. So we say work, then place. When we talk about place, Sara, when we talk about position in their book, you write about these invisible systems that shape behavior. And I found that delightful because it's certainly been my experience too. But I wonder for the listeners, if you might give us some examples of when you say invisible systems, like what might that mean?
Yeah, happy to. So I think Corinne just gave a good one in the intranets that drive you crazy. I was thinking about, when you go into wherever you hold all of your files and you're searching for a file, right? You can't find that file and you're getting more and more angry, and then your behavior changes for the rest of the day based on the fact that this digital system wasn't serving you the way it needed to. So if you're really looking at digital, physical, and experiential places, you're going to start to see so many of those places where there is invisible systems that cause friction. And there are many different ways to solve those, right? But, you got to start to look at some of your solves, some of your amplifiers, all of that sort of thing. I think there's a really good example in the book where if you build an IT platform that streamlines digital collaboration, but then real estate maintains an open concept, you're probably going to cause some friction and start amplifying noise, not amplifying effectiveness the way that you want to. And so starting to look at all of those resources that you're giving people, whether it be open workspace or digital tools or digital communication screens that are telling you new things that people might be talking about, and map those across the environments, you can help identify some of those clashes.
That makes good sense. And I just really enjoyed the frameworks that you presented in the book. I wish we had time to go through all of them, but we don't. But I do recognize that some of the people listening in, whether they're managers, they're on the HR side, they may even be high-performing employees, we don't always have the latitude to make all the decisions like what we're going to do with our interior design, for example. But what recommendations would you have for, let's say, a team leader? You're a first-level manager, you've got some direct reports. Like, how can I sort of embody and practice work, then place in a way that's going to boost the performance of my team, certainly, but also, their welfare?
We wrote this as much as possible for it to be usable, regardless of what level of seniority you have. So for that first level manager or someone in between that and like the director or the VP level, there's still a lot here for you to learn how to coalition build and work with your teammates, work with your, teammate, like teams that are collaborating with you, and really define what are the ways that we work well together. And so in the information in section 1, I think gives a really great baseline of how you can start to plot what are quality ways of working for me and the people that I work with. We get, in section 2, we give the example of how to design quality meeting culture. But there are so many other ways that you as an individual can start to generate a flow of considering what's the best way to achieve the work that we need on the outcome side or the output side. And that doesn't require seniority. That just it requires eyes and someone willing to sort of be the sort of usher for the group. But I do think so I think that it's really important for, people who are, in those levels to recognize that you do actually have more agency than you realize, because I think it's safe to assume that most people who are more and more senior are more and more bogged down. So if you can be that agent to sort of just like find the openings and find the opportunities and facilitate that change, seniority doesn't matter.
I like to call it finding the common goal. I call it the cohort of people that are finding the common goal. And as soon as you can bring together everyone, and the common goal is simplified for executives and maybe more of a tactical thing for those who manage the physical, digital, and experiential environments, and maybe more of a want for the individual champions that are throughout all the different teams and all of that sort of stuff. You can really start to drive everyone towards that common goal, even though you may not feel like you have the power to go do something. It's in the book, it's called The Daisy. We kind of give you every single one of these teams that you need to figure out how to create that common goal between in order to drive it forward.
I like that a lot. And I think that it's great because the book, even if you're not in control of things like interior design, it raises your awareness that these things are having an impact and shaping the experiences that we've been talking about. But then there's plenty of actionable tips and strategies you can absolutely take, regardless of what level you're in. So what I thought I'd do is give us a really big change of pace here. We've been talking about change. I love to ask my guests a trivia question. This is a segment I call, Are We Smarter Than AI? I've had AI prepare a question. So I don't know the question, I don't know the answers, but we're going to be a team. We're going to try to get this right. And so I thought about what are some TV workplaces in honor of all the work you've done in workplaces. So here's the question. In the popular TV show The Office, what's the name of the fictional paper company where the main characters work? There's multiple choices. Is it A, Dunder Mifflin, B, Scranton Paper Company, or C, Paper World?
Dunder Mifflin.
There it is. So our guest,
we watch way too much The Office, apparently.
Right. Sara and Corinne are locked in. If you're playing along at home, audience, you can lock in your answer. Is it Dunder Mifflin, Scranton Paper Company, or Paper World? We're going with Dunder Mifflin. You got it. That is absolutely the correct answer. I have a much better question for you both, which is, where can my listeners go to learn more about you and about your fabulous book?
Yep. So we do have a website, www.workthenplace.com. It will give you easy ways to contact us via email, in a chat, any of those sorts of things. The book is available for sale on Amazon.com. And Corinne, I'll let you talk about our Substack because she manages it.
Yeah. So I am managing our Substack, which is workthenplace.substack.com. A lot of it is really just, more positioning about where the book fits in the ecosystem of the future of work and workplaces. So you can follow along for, more conversation around that. And we'll be sharing a bit more as we ramp up in our pre-sale exercise coming up.
Fabulous. Listeners, I'm going to have those links for you in the show notes. You're only one click away from connecting with Sara, Corinne, learning all about Work Then Place. I can't thank you both enough for being with us today. I really enjoyed the book. It's so well researched and so practical and so pervasive. I mean, we don't really need to think more deeply about the way we do our work and where we do our work and how we approach it. So thank you both for being with me today.
Thank you so much. Take care.